Okay, guys, so today I'm going to talk to you about high leverage poetry devices. The reason I like to call them high leverage poetry devices is because there are a million and one poetry devices, poetic forms, different types of references that a person can use in their poetry writing that we are not going to talk about in AP Lit this year. But honestly, in order to be successful in the AP exam and really in order to understand any poem from the get-go, you really only need about 20 to 25 different poetic devices to get you out of the starting block. Okay, so the reason I call these high leverage is because you'll need it a little bit in order to move a lot of analysis about poetry. So make sure that you're writing down notes as I'm going. Feel free to pause the video at any point that you need. So the first is probably a review for a lot of you is alliteration, the repetition of beginning consonant sounds. The next is another one that might also be a refresher, an allusion. So a good way to think about an allusion is a reference to something famous. Just like in this image here, maybe you have been around your older brother, older sister, or younger brother, younger sister, and they're acting kind of mean and defiant and crotchety, and you say, you're being a Grinch, okay? So it's not a reference to the Bible. It's not a reference to Greek mythology. It's just a reference to a well-known piece of literature, right? The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, to make the point known. So it's a lot more effective to use an allusion in some cases than to say, you're acting really stubborn, but you're acting like a Grinch seals the deal in a more precise way by drawing on the ideas we already have about that famous reference. The next is apostrophe. Okay, so I know if you study Latin, you probably have heard of this word. For those of us who haven't, and for those of us who just need a refresher, an apostrophe is a reference to a non-living or dead missing person. Okay, so if you ever heard that Meghan Trainor song, Dear Future Husband, perfect example of apostrophe in a song. If you take a look at this poem, it's called An Apostrophe to the Apostrophe. Okay, so one really easy way for you to know that the speaker is referencing a non-living item is if you see whatever the item is set out in a comma. Okay, we know from our grammatical knowledge that whenever a name or a person is set out in a comma, that means it's a direct address to that person. For apostrophe, here I've got small floater, comma, you stay above the fray, okay? I know from this beginning line that I am directly referring to an apostrophe, the grammatical symbol, because not only am I saying you, like here, right, but I'm also calling it a small floater directly. All right, so these are a few different words that denote the way that words sound in a poem. So we have, first of all, assonance and consonants. So assonance is a repeated vowel sound in a line, and consonance is the repeated consonant sound in a line. Assonance and consonants sometimes are happening, all over a poem, but when you can find a particular moment of assonance and consonants, that's when you're gonna really be able to unlock what the poet is doing through a line. So for instance, shout into the ridges of the wind. Okay, this is an example of assonance. It's the repeated short I sound in this line. Now, in this poem, it's used to really emphasize the breeziness of the wind and the breeziness of the blowing air as they're shouting out into this anonymity. Okay, so the I sound, the repeated I sound, draws the reader's attention to that feeling of being lost in an abyss because it's a short sound that only juts very quickly into consciousness. I'm going to come back to this slide. So this is an example of consonants. So the repeated B sound in this line, listen for it. She dances like a bomb abroad. Okay, so it's not at the beginning of both of the words, but the bomb abroad is really trying to emphasize the B sound, which kind of gives the feeling of the bomb exploding and being really loud and shattering and battering the environment. So a bomb abroad is an intentional use of consonants. So going back, we've got cacophony and euphony. These are also two opposites. So it's a good way to remember both of these words is that their definitions sound like the word itself. So cacophony, if I listen to that word cacophony, it sounds really harsh and jarring. That's what cacophony means. Cacophony, or if I were to use the adjective cacophonous, means harsh, repeated sounds. And then euphony, the opposite, sounds like the definition sounds exactly like the word sounds. So it's very soft, melodious, peaceful sounds. So if you listen to this line, all good for grinding, mocajete, fist, knuckle, decomposing mass. Okay. This is a good example of cacophony. The reason that the poet uses cacophony here is because he really wants, or she really wants, to draw on the sound imagery that's happening as you're reading the line while you're seeing all of these things grinding together. Okay, so this is really trying to echo the grinding feeling in the line to emphasize the tone there. Oh, I didn't have an example of euphony. So we'll look at more examples of euphony in class. But for our purposes, this is cacophony. Or I'm sorry, well, this is an example of consonants. We had assonance, and then cacophony and euphony. The next word is caesura. So a caesura is a pause or break in the middle of the line. So it's as if you're reading a line of poetry, and typically you read to the line and the end of the punctuation. Okay, so when you have a punctuation in the middle of the line, it's just like our MC Hammer here, where he's like, stop, hammer time. Okay, so caesura is always going to be denoted by a dash, semicolon, question mark, or exclamation point in the middle of the line. That's not where it should go, typically. It's not going to be a comma because sometimes lines are broken up with commas, but an intentional breaking of ideas and breaking of the line typically should run really smoothly, is going to be denoted by one of these punctuations. So if you look at this poem, dead, one of them shot by the sea in the east, and one of them shot by the sea in the west. Dead, both my boys. Okay, so these are all examples of caesura. Caesura is used, obviously, to make an emotional impact on the reader. Obviously, they want to emphasize this feeling how the speaker is having of their child being dead, and this whole poem is a war poem. And so the caesura is really helping build up both the feeling and the attitude of the speaker, as well as supposed to impact the tone as how the reader is understanding how the speaker is feeling. So we've got a conceit or an extended metaphor. Now, technically they have two different definitions, but the definitions are so slight that we're going to use them in the same way. So an extended metaphor is a really good way to think about a conceit. I think that's an easier way to remember that definition. So an extended metaphor is just one metaphor that starts at the beginning of the poem and goes throughout the entire poem to make a longer meaning than just one short metaphor. Okay, so just like our cat stretching here, it stretches from beginning of end to the poem. So if I were you, I would go ahead and pause here so that you can read out The Flea by John Donne. See when you're reading it if you can figure out what the extended metaphor is. All right, so obviously you saw that the flea is biting this woman, and both of their blood is going to exist in this woman, which is supposed to be a metaphor for them. He's trying to get it on with this woman. Okay. So this is an extended metaphor because the whole poem is encapsulated